Hello everyone, my name is Rhys Kościński. This is Simple Philosophy, where we simplify philosophers to help you better understand life. Today we're going to be discussing liberalism. In particular today we're going to be taking a look at classic liberalism because it seems to have become a bit of a buzzword, particularly on the political right, where various conservatives are saying they're not actually conservative, they are classic liberal. So we're going to be delving into these concepts today, and we're going to take a look at the liberal conception of the state of nature, the liberal conception of individualism, the role of the state within classic liberal thought, as well as the economy. Each of these concepts has been broken down in the description with time signatures linking you to those specific concepts. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And without further ado, let's get into it. I think before we get into a discussion on the different concepts of classic liberalism, we should have an overview as to what liberalism is, some of the foundational concepts which ground all of the various different interpretations that link to liberalism. The first thing we need to know is that the roots of liberalism can be found in the Age of Enlightenment, which was a philosophical movement against some of the early modern conceptions of philosophy and society, which was based in science, reason, and logic. Generally, the Age of Enlightenment posed an opposition to medieval politics, the idea that a king had a right to rule through concepts such as the divine right of kings, or that certain people had the right to rule over other people. The Age of Enlightenment develops opposition to these concepts. Similarly, they also opposed the philosophy of faith and superstition, that instead of relying on, for example, Christian notions of God and understandings of life, or superstitious notions such as, we could probably use a modern conception of horoscopes, that we shouldn't rely on these philosophies in order to lead our life. Instead, we should base our understanding of ourselves, our understanding of life, on reason and logic. We should put our faith in science, in rationality, and all of these various different things so we can lead a modern, clarified existence. Similarly, it's also worth noting, because many liberals today seem to have forgotten, the early radicalism that was in liberalism. Liberalism was initially a very revolutionary idea and a very revolutionary doctrine that influenced both the French and the American Revolution, and we can see most of its concepts enshrined in various different constitutions, such as the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the American Declaration of Independence, both taking place in the 18th century. Another core concept related to liberalism is the concept of individualism. And individualism is a foundational concept within all the different conceptions or bastardizations of the terms as it has developed and as it has moved on. So the central thing for liberals is that the individual is the most important aspect, or the most important philosophical subject. Above all, it is more important than the collective, it is more important than the community. The individual and the development of the individual is central to all of the different ideas and understandings of individualism. It is not collective, it is not socialism, although it certainly has, you can argue, collectivist aspects in it. The individual, the development of the individual is central to this, as well as the idea that each individual is born free and equal. No one has the right to rule over someone else. No one has the right to undermine someone else's individuality. So regardless of the different strands of liberalism, each of these concepts remains core to the foundational ideas of the ideology. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the liberal conception of the state of nature, or how liberals tend to understand us in the state of nature. Before we can get into that, let's get into what the state of nature actually is. So the state of nature is a concept that has been used by philosophers to attempt to describe the hypothetical life or existence that humanity had before the modern state, government, or laws came into being. Or to simplify it another way, what philosophers try to do is deduce what reality was like before the emergence of the modern state. So how humans interacted with no laws, no governments, and no restraints on our natural human nature, on our natural being. And various different philosophers have taken different ideas or different conceptions as to what this means. Now, the best juxtaposition of the state of nature with liberalism and various other ideas would be Hobbes and Locke. Now, some researchers argue that Hobbes is actually a liberal, and some argue that he is conservative. So people such as John Gray argue that Hobbes was a kind of foundational liberal theorist, whereas others would argue he is closer to conservatism. For the sake of this video, we're going to pretend that Hobbes is a conservative, although I certainly do identify the liberal arguments. And in Hobbes's state of nature, Hobbes argues that reality was initially chaotic, that there was a lack of organization between different individuals, between different people, and that society was nasty, brutish, and short. Everything was chaotic, and because there are finite resources, everyone was only interested in themselves, what they could provide for themselves and their families in order to get by and survive. And Hobbes refers to this as a war against all. Everyone was at war with each other. Everyone was competing with each other in order to gain what they needed. And for Hobbes, this would be the foundation of the state of nature, that before the modern state came in order to organize us, in order to distribute resources, reality was brutal, harsh, competitive, and warlike. Now, if we flip this over, the state of nature, to someone like John Locke, who we are going to argue is the foundational theorist of the liberal state of nature, John Locke took a completely different approach to Hobbes and his idea that the state of nature is warlike or brutal, or battles between different individuals. Locke argues that in the state of nature, humans are all born equal and free. And as we are born equal and free, we also encompass natural rights such as the rights to property. So what Hobbes is saying here is no one has the right to rule over another person, because each individual, each person is equal, and each person is free. We also are bound by these natural rights, such as the right to property, or the right to own land, the right to own resources. These are natural rights which are given to us in the state of nature. So try and think of it in this way. So we understand in physics with people like Isaac Newton that the universe has some fundamental laws as to how it operates, how it functions. So some of the natural laws of the earth would be gravity, the fact that what goes up must come down, and there is a magnetic pull which is pulling things towards the earth's core. This would be a natural law of nature within physics. Well, in liberalism and in philosophy, they have exactly the same conception. And for Locke, this natural law includes the rights to own things, to own property. So human nature is therefore bound by the laws of nature, where no one should harm another in their life. They shouldn't harm someone else's liberty, and no one harms another person's possessions. So for the fundamental law of nature for Locke is that none of these things would naturally be damaged. And the reason why you wouldn't take another person's life, or the reason why you wouldn't harm someone else's freedoms or possession, is because you are naturally a rational and tolerant person. Naturally, humans want to appeal to logic, or use their logic in order to overcome issues and in order to manage themselves. That we have a natural ability to understand the views of others and respect other people's lives, other people's liberty, and other people's possessions. That we can appeal to humans' natural desire for logic and to understand and go through things in a logical order to overcome these problems. So generally, any disputes that occur within the state of nature, so say for example I've damaged someone's property or somehow damaged someone's liberty by punching them in the face, disputes can generally be settled or overcome if we sit down at a table and we can discuss our differences between each other and logically overcome them for the benefit of both of us. So therefore, because everyone is wanting to pursue our own rational self-interest, this allows us to achieve happiness and allows us to progress socially, because we're living in a harmonious state of nature, a harmonious type of society, which allows us to develop our own individuality and our own uniqueness in that way. So it's very optimistic in that sense. Another key tenet of classic liberalism is, of course, individualism, but different liberals have different ideas as to what individualism means and how individualism should be conceived. If you are a classic liberal, you would generally follow this idea of egotistical individualism, and this is the idea that the individual is naturally self-seeking, self-reliant, and independent, and that society doesn't function as a collective, it doesn't function as people collaborating or coming together. Society instead operates as no more than a loose connection of individuals. We are all atoms passing each other in a form of harmonious relationships. And that's how liberals or classic liberals tend to see individualism, that we are only interested in our own self-interests, and that this can, because in the state of nature we are naturally harmonious in doing this, society can progress. Now, egotistical individuals do cooperate with others and show self-restraint for their own interest. And this is because individuals are naturally rational. So let's think of it this way. If we're holding that each individual is naturally selfish, if we are holding that each individual is only out for their own interests, how do they cooperate with other people? Well, classic liberals would argue that because we are all rational, because we are all tolerant, because we want to deal with things in a semi-cooperative manner in order to pursue our own self-interest, that we will sit down and we will consider the freedom of other people. So this involves living in a society of peace and harmony where beliefs and values and lifestyle choices are respected. So the idea is that you are free to do what you want to do, and I will respect that provided it doesn't get in the way of my own beliefs, my own values, and my own lifestyle choices. So this would be perfectly reasonable, perfectly rational to the classic liberal conception of freedom. Another way to kind of expand on this is to look at Mary Wollstonecraft's early version of, I guess you could call it feminism. I know that is somewhat debated amongst feminist scholars, but in Wollstonecraft's vindication of the rights of women, she argued that women had the right to education to allow them to develop into rational beings. There was ideas at the time that women were separate to men, that women could not hold the same level of rationality as a man, and she argues that actually women can hold the same level of rationality because they are human beings, and so therefore by giving women an education, by allowing them to develop their rationality, they can contribute to society, and this will benefit society as a whole so that they can reason with various other people, essentially. So therefore, egotistical individualism is central, and without everyone receiving a reasonable level of education to become rational, whether they are men, women, black, white, whatever, they cannot pursue the good life, and they cannot pursue their own happiness, and therefore society will be hampered as a result. Now, classic liberals have a rather unique conception of the state, and one that has been used in political rhetoric but hasn't necessarily been enacted to its full extreme. So for John Locke, he argued that the state is a creation of humankind that occurred after the state of nature that he described in the earlier slide. So Locke argues that the state or government was established to protect and enhance natural rights, so the natural rights that we are given in the state of nature, which include the right to own property. The reason the state or government emerges is because people have consented to the creation of the state, that we as free individuals have agreed for a state to come into being, to come into existence, in order to protect the natural rights that we have all been born with, to protect the natural equalities that we have all been born with. But for Locke, the state has an extremely minimal role, or should have a minimal role. He's not talking about big government here. He's talking about a state occurring to have a minimal role in people's lives. And he believes that the state can only intervene to settle disputes between free individuals. So even though we may have sat down and had a rational discussion about our disagreements, the state can be the neutral umpire which decides whether someone's freedom has been damaged or not, and can help to resolve these particular issues. John Stuart Mill extends this a little more, and I think he clarifies the concept a little bit clearer than Locke. So John Stuart Mill has this concept, or this classic liberal conception, of negative freedom. So freedom in the classic liberal conception is freedom from other people, that I should have the right to do what I want without other people interfering with that. I should have the right to smoke on my own property without someone else telling me what to do and what I can do. And out of this, Locke develops the concept of the harm principle, which has been summed up very nicely in this quote that one of my colleagues gave me, that the state begins where your fist touches the other person's nose. So let's just break this down. Let's imagine that you are going out on the town on a Saturday night. You yourself have become blindingly drunk, that you are spewing up and end up passing out in the streets. For Locke, this is perfectly fine, or for Mill, this is perfectly fine. The fact that you have damaged yourself is your own business and is not the business of the state. However, if you become so blindingly drunk and you realize that someone is giving your partner the eye from across the bar, you then turn aggressive and punch them in the face, you have then limited the freedom and liberty of the person that you are punching, and therefore the state has a right to intervene in this circumstance. So therefore the state begins and can intervene when your fist touches the end of another person's nose. So there are clear limits and clear boundaries of the state, and again, the state in this circumstance is protecting the natural equalities, the natural rights, and the natural freedoms and liberties of the other people. Again, it also links to that concept of negative freedom. It is the freedom from another person punching you in the face. So therefore, you are always free in this sense. The state has a limited role, and the state cannot overbear its role or go too far for classic liberals in this sense. Similarly, the reason the state comes into being, or the reason that individuals accept the state, is because we as individuals, as free individuals, enter into a social contract where the state acts as a neutral umpire to resolve clashes between free individuals. And the social contract is key and can sometimes be referred to as citizenship. That citizenship, we could argue, is a social contract between us and the state, where we agree that the state can step in order to resolve these clashes that we mentioned in terms of punching people in the face. If the state breaks this contract by not protecting or enhancing our natural rights, we can then withdraw our consent for the state. The state no longer has the credibility, it no longer has the validity of the population, so therefore it needs to be removed, or we can withdraw our consent and remove the state. And we can think about this in the context of the American Constitution, that if the state does not protect or enhance our natural rights, you have the rights to bear arms and technically overthrow your government if you wish. We don't have the same situation in England, but in America, that's probably the clearest example. Now, how do we withdraw consent, or how does consent constantly keep being reaffirmed? Well, this can be through liberal or representative government. So the state should represent the will of property owning individuals, that if I own property, my property should be protected, or my natural rights to that property should be protected by the state, and I should be able to elect people who can represent my views and my interests in government, whether that be in a parliamentary system or whether that be in a constitutional system. Similarly, constitutionalism is a central concept to the classic liberal state because government must be legally limited in its powers by a constitution in order to protect freedom. And this is so that we do not fall back into a feudalist situation with the divine right of kings, where one individual has the right to tyrannically pass laws, raise taxes over a locale or a local area, damaging the freedom of each individual. By producing a constitution, it clearly outlines the limits and powers of individuals, of the state, and of those in charge, so that the state cannot infringe on my own freedom and on my own individual liberty. So there are strong restraints placed in there. The final area that classic liberalism discusses, and this is probably one of the most influential areas, or still today probably one of the most popular areas that classic liberalism has influenced, is the economy. Now, for liberals, they believe that the market economy is the best way to ensure freedom and individualism within society. So a market economy is essentially where investment, production, and distribution decisions are guided by price signals relating to supply and demand. That depending on demand for a product and producing a product, I can then rationally decide what to invest in, what to produce, and what to distribute and sell on the market. Now, this kind of links to a very famous conception, which is a rising tide lifts all ships. That for classic liberals, they believe that the market economy is the best way to lift the conditions of all and lift the liberties of all, and that by allowing free trade, so having no restrictions on imports or exports, being able to trade, sell, buy things wherever I want, this can be a huge benefit to society, promoting individualism and freedom, and those concepts that we have discussed earlier on in the lecture. Classic liberals are also in favour of laissez-faire capitalism. So this is the idea that the state must not interfere with free trade and competition by using subsidies, taxes, or promoting monopolies. So essentially, they believe the state must have minimal involvement in the economy. That instead, the state cannot ask for subsidies, it cannot ask for to raise taxes, for example, in relation to benefiting the state, and it also cannot promote monopolies. So it cannot nationalize certain industries, it cannot skew the rules to benefit certain businesses. Instead, the state must move away from the free market, and by doing that, it promotes individualism, and it promotes freedom, and it promotes individual equality too. Now, the state isn't completely removed from the liberal economy. The state does have a crucial role in ensuring property rights are protected and that contracts are enforced, and that includes working contracts. So, for example, if you don't turn up to work for so long, or if you promise to deliver so many goods contractually and then you don't, the state can then come in and intervene as a neutral umpire to make sure that this contract is enforced and that the owner of the business receives what they contracted you to do. So another kind of conception of the liberal economy comes from Jean-Baptiste Say in his A Treatise on Political Economy. Say argues that the central idea of the economy, or the way the economy works, is that supply creates its own demand. So Say believe that by producing a product, this creates demand for another product. So let's say, for example, I came up with the invention of the torch and I produce a torch. I then put that on the market. But when you buy a torch, you realize you actually need batteries in order for that torch to run. So therefore, I can then create a new product, and then you can buy that too. So by producing a product and putting it on the market, it then creates demand for another product, and by doing that, the free market will create jobs. So not only do I need a factory to produce torches, I will then need to open another factory to create batteries, and that will then require more workers and more people to be employed. And so the invisible hand of the market is guiding employment, it is guiding the development of the economy, and it is guiding the development of society. And as I say, by employing more people, paying them wages, that increases the individualism and happiness and right to own property of the rest of the population, and links back to that idea of that conception that a rising tide lifts all boats. Even if the owner is earning copious amounts of money by selling the torch, you are also benefiting from that, because that means that they can pay your wages. And final demand that classic liberalism asks is of the labour market, or they require a flexible labour market. Now, this idea is that you would only employ people who will agree to work for what the company is offering. So you wouldn't necessarily, you can demand for higher wages, but that would be on an individual basis and depending upon your worth. But the company is offering, say for example, you've got two torch factories. One factory down the street is offering you £7 an hour, and the other one down the street is offering you £7.50. Okay, so you would rationally choose which one to work at, and you would only work for that rate that the company is setting. They also argue that if unemployment arises, this is not due to any issues in the economy, or not due to issues relating to the harmonious relationship of the market. They argue that unemployment arises due to people's refusal to accept work. It is because they are lazy. But this encourages people to be rational. And remember, classic liberals believe that people are nationally rational. It makes sense to get a job where you are being paid £3 an hour than not having a job at all where you're earning no money. Because you are rational, you will rationally choose the better option of earning £3 an hour, and therefore you will be willing to work for less, which then keeps the economy flowing, keeps prices at a certain level, and allows me to make more money using your labour. So just some key conclusions just from this lecture. So the key ideas of classic liberalism is that humans are naturally rational, equal, and bound by the laws of nature. We are all confined to these rules. The next one is that liberalism is central to society's development, that unless the individual can flourish, unless we have the tools to become rational beings, society will not progress. Similarly, the state should be limited, and it should only be there as a neutral umpire to enhance natural rights. It can only intervene to settle disputes between free individuals and enhance those natural rights that we have discussed. And finally, laissez-faire capitalism and the free market is essentially best to promote individualism and rationalism in society. So what do you think about classic liberalism? Do you think it is a good conception? Do you think it's got some good ideas? Do you agree with Locke? Are we all naturally rational? Let me know down below in the comments. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next video where we will discuss modern liberalism.